All right, guys, we're going to take another look at the Cold War here. I hope you enjoyed the Berlin airlift video. The Berlin airlift was basically the first showdown of the Cold War. The Cold War is going to be fought differently. America and the Soviet Union never engage each other, so it's always through diplomatic actions or military actions with other countries. Okay, so we're seeing that America has this policy of containment. We want to contain the spread of communism anywhere we can. So we're going to see this play out in Asia. I'm going to try to keep this quick as I go through this. So we have Chiang Kai-shek. He is the Chinese nationalist. He is not necessarily a good guy, but he is not communist. So America's going to support him, $3 billion in aid, trying to keep him in power. And he has a lot of influence over southern and eastern China. Then you have Mao Zedong. Mao Zedong gets aid from, he's the communist ruler, Chairman Mao, often he's referred to as. He gets support from the peasants, he gets support from the Soviet Union, and he is going to try to take over control of China. So there's a civil war in China. This is going on for basically 20 years from post-World War II until the early 50s. And we see that the United States tries to smooth things out, but we will not send troops in. We are not going to actively get involved in China. Some people regret that because then we see that Chiang Kai-shek and the nationalists, they have to flee to the island of Taiwan, and they will lose control of mainland China. So in essence, that's what we have here. You might hear of the Chinese protests before this whole coronavirus outbreak and so forth, and that has a lot to do with the relationship between Taiwan and China. You'll probably learn more about that next year. All right, so America's reaction. We're looking at this. Hey, did we fail? Did we, why were we so concerned about containment in Europe but not in Asia? Is this the first loss in the Cold War? Truman basically said, it was much more difficult for us to influence the Chinese population than it was European populations. But anyway, this becomes like the example. America did not intervene militarily, and we'll see that the Soviet Union and other communist countries at that point will think, well, America's not going to intervene. This brings us to Korea. All right, so Korea was occupied by Japan between 1910 and the end of World War II. Japan was horrible to the Koreans. Japan ends up surrendering north of the 38 parallel to the Soviets. The Soviets set up a communist government in Korea at that point, in North Korea, and the U.S. sets up a democratic government in the South Korea. Okay, they agreed on the division, both America and the Soviets, and said, hey, as things play out here, we'll work to unify Korea. Well, that was before the whole showdown in Germany. That was before we really both emerged as the two superpowers in this Cold War struggle. All right, so there you see North and South Korea. Come on. Okay, so Stalin, after seeing that America did not intervene in China, encourages the North Koreans to go take over South Korea, push the American occupiers out, push the American-supported forces out, and he believes that we're not even going to get involved here. Like in China, we didn't get involved. So in June of 1950, we see 80,000 North Korean soldiers cross the border into South Korea. So, communism quite literally has crossed the line. Truman's reaction here. He decides to use armed forces. We do not declare war at this point, but we do send armed forces. This is the beginning of the Korean War. So the UN voted and approved this military action. The Soviets were not at that meeting to veto this action. We also increased our military support in Western Europe. So the Korean War, basically General MacArthur's put in charge. By September, UN forces are getting beat pretty bad. We're going to have to really change the tide here. MacArthur lands troops, and we begin to push towards the north. So I'm trying to keep this quick here. The attempt to unify Korea is basically a failure at this point. So you can see there was a push, the first phase, you have the push down where the UN forces are here. Then we see American forces come, they're able to push up here. Then there's communist forces supported by Chinese forces and so forth. Now, today, we have this stalemate. To this date, we have this stalemate here. So it's a back and forth, as you basically saw on those maps. The Chinese supported North Korea. They again capture South Korea. This is what now there's going to be a showdown between Douglas MacArthur and Truman. Douglas MacArthur publicly says he wants to nuke China. Well, nuking China is going to lead to an all-out World War III nuclear war. Could be the end of the world itself. So the UN forces, they get to the stalemate at the 38th parallel. Now, this becomes a very public fight between Douglas MacArthur and Truman. MacArthur goes and he testifies before Congress. The Republicans Truman is a Democrat. The Republicans and MacArthur begin to criticize Truman, and Truman ends up firing him. So MacArthur, gave China an ultimatum. Make peace or you're going to be attacked. Now, this is coming from MacArthur, not Truman. And that's where the division ends up happening here. So then Truman says, listen, I'm the president. You work for me. And he ends up getting fired. So at the end of the war, technically, this is still an ongoing conflict. However, there's not been violence for a long time. So there's a ceasefire in 1951. The border still exists today. And we have this demilitarized zone, which is right here.